I used to believe love could survive anything. Distance, stress, long hours, silence. I believed all of it because I loved my wife more than I loved myself. Looking back now, that was probably my first mistake. My name is Elliot Mercer. I am 32 years old, and I work as an architect in Manchester. 6 months before everything fell apart, I accepted a major project in New York. The money was good, the opportunity was bigger, and Sophie had smiled when I told her about it. At least one of us will finally escape this rainy city, she joked. I laughed back then. Now I remember how forced her smile looked. The night before my flight, I stood in our kitchen packing paperwork in my bag, while Sophie stared at her phone. "You still angry with me?" I asked. She looked up slowly. "Why would I be angry? You've barely spoken all week." "I'm tired, Elliot. That's all." She shrugged. "You're leaving for 6 months. What exactly do you want me to say?" I stopped folding my shirts. "Maybe that you'll miss me." Her eyes softened for half a second. "Of course I'll miss you." But she said it like she was reading lines from a script. The next morning, my younger brother Ryan drove us to Heathrow Airport. Ryan had always been louder than me, funnier than me, more careless than me. Women loved him. Trouble loved him too. "You Americans better not steal my brother," Ryan said while unloading my suitcase. "They can keep him," Sophie replied quietly. Ryan laughed hard at that. "Cool." I forced a smile. "Nice to know I'll be remembered." Inside the terminal, Sophie hugged me quickly. Too quickly. Her body felt stiff against mine. "Call me when you land," she said. "I will." Ryan pulled me into a rough hug next. "Don't worry about Sophie. I'll look after her while you're gone." "Thanks." Then something strange happened. Sophie and Ryan exchanged a quick look. It lasted maybe 1 second, but my stomach tightened anyway. I almost asked about it. Instead, I ignored the feeling because they were the two people I trusted most in the world. New York hit me like a train. Loud streets, endless traffic, people who never slowed down. My company rented me a tiny apartment in Brooklyn that smelled like old paint and burned coffee. On my first morning, my boss Graham Whitmore shook my hand without smiling. "You're late," he said. "It's 8 on the dot." "Exactly. Around here, on time means 10 minutes early." That was Graham. Sharp suits, sharp words, no patience. The project consumed my life immediately. I worked 12-hour days designing luxury office towers while Graham hovered behind me like a storm cloud. "This draft is weak," he snapped one afternoon. "It follows the client's request." I don't care about the client's request. I care about perfection. By the end of each day, I felt exhausted and alone. Sophie rarely answered my calls immediately anymore. One evening, I finally reached her after 3 missed attempts. "Hey," I said. "You busy?" "Just watching television." "I miss you." "That's sweet." I waited. "Do you miss me too?" "Of course." Again, the same empty tone. I tried keeping the conversation alive. "How's work?" "Fine." "How's Mom?" "Fine." "How's Ryan?" There was a tiny pause before she answered. "Why are you asking about Ryan?" "I was just asking." "He's fine too." The call ended 10 minutes later, and somehow I felt worse afterward. On Fridays, Ryan usually sent me stupid voice notes to make me laugh. One week, he stopped completely. When I asked Sophie if she had heard from him, she answered too quickly. "He's around." That doesn't sound like him. "He's busy, Elliot." "With what?" "Why are you so interested in my conversations with your brother?" The question caught me off guard. I apologized, but the tension in her voice stayed with me after the call ended. Weeks passed like that. Work, stress, silence. One night, close to midnight, Sophie finally answered a video call. Her hair looked messy, and the room behind her was dark. "You okay?" I asked. "I was asleep. Sorry. Graham kept us late again." She nodded distractedly. Then I heard it. A man's voice somewhere behind her. I sat upright instantly. "Who's there?" Her face changed. Just for a second, panic flashed across it. "No one." I heard someone. "The television's on." "Sophie." The call suddenly disconnected. I stared at the black screen for several seconds before calling back. No answer. Then a text appeared. "Sorry. Bad connection. Going back to sleep. Love you." I read the message 5 times. For the first time since arriving in New York, something cold settled deep inside my chest. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was instinct. Later that night, I sat alone beside the small apartment window, twisting my wedding ring around my finger while rain hammered the glass outside. I suddenly realized my own home no longer felt like home at all. Weeks passed, and Sophie became harder to reach every single day. Sometimes she ignored my calls for hours. Other times she answered sounding distracted, like speaking to me had become another chore she needed to finish quickly. New York stopped feeling exciting. It became a prison made of glass buildings, traffic, and loneliness. One Monday morning, Graham slammed a folder onto my desk. "This design is unfinished." "It's still in development," I replied. "You've been here nearly 3 months, Elliot. Start acting like you deserve the salary." I clenched my jaw. I stayed until midnight fixing the west elevation, and it still looks weak. After he walked away, I rubbed my face slowly, trying not to lose my temper. That was when Naomi Clark sat beside me holding 2 coffees. "You look awful," she said. "Thanks. I mean it. You've looked exhausted for weeks." "I'm fine." "No, you're pretending to be fine." Naomi was one of the few people in the office who treated me like a human being instead of a machine. She was sharp, honest, and impossible to intimidate. She pushed one coffee toward me. "Talk." "There's nothing to talk about." "Your wife." I looked up immediately. "Why would you assume it's Sophie?" "Because every time your phone lights up, your face changes." I stared at the untouched coffee. "Things feel different lately." "How different?" "Cold. Distant." Naomi folded her arms. "Have you asked her directly?" "She always says I'm imagining things." "That usually means you're not." Her answer stayed in my head all day. That evening, Graham destroyed another presentation in front of the entire team. "This project is collapsing because nobody here pays attention," he snapped. I barely listened. My mind kept drifting back to Sophie. After the meeting ended, I walked outside into the freezing night air. My phone buzzed while I waited for a taxi. Unknown number. At first I ignored it. Then another message appeared. "Look at the screenshots carefully." My chest tightened instantly. I opened the images. The first screenshot showed Sophie laughing through text messages. The second showed flirtatious jokes. The third made my stomach drop completely. "Miss you already, Red Heart. Can't wait until Elliot stays in New York longer." Below the message was the contact name, R. I stared at the screen so long my hands started shaking. "No," I whispered. "No way." I called Sophie immediately. She answered after the 4th ring. "Hello. Tell me the truth." "What?" "I just got sent screenshots." Silence. "Sophie, you're acting paranoid, Elliot." "Then who is R?" Another silence. I could hear her breathing softly through the phone. "Those messages are fake," she finally said. "Don't lie to me." "I'm not lying." "Then explain them." "I don't have to explain fake screenshots." Anger rose inside me. Why would someone send me fake conversations between my wife and another man? "I don't know, because people are cruel." "Who is R?" "You're becoming controlling." I laughed bitterly. "Controlling?" "I'm asking why my wife is texting another man about me staying overseas longer." "You're overreacting." "I just want honesty." "You want to accuse me because you're insecure." Her words hit harder than I expected. "You seriously think this is my fault?" "I think being alone in New York is making you paranoid." I leaned against the wall outside the office building, suddenly exhausted. Part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted desperately to believe her. Finally, I whispered, "I'm sorry." "You should be." The call ended seconds later. I stayed outside another 20 minutes staring at traffic while doubt tore through my head. The screenshots felt real. Sophie's reaction felt wrong. But accusing her without proof made me feel sick. Around midnight, Ryan suddenly called me. "Oi, big brother," he said loudly. "Still surviving America?" "Barely." He laughed, but something about it sounded forced. "You all right?" I asked. "Yeah. Why wouldn't I be?" "You sound nervous." "I'm not nervous." In the background, I thought I heard movement. Then Ryan said casually, "Saw Sophie earlier today, by the way." My grip tightened around the phone. "Really?" "Yeah. Her kitchen sink was leaking again." Funny. Sophie had mentioned a leaking sink during our last call, too. Ryan kept talking. "She's struggling with you being gone. I call her every day." "I know. I'm just saying she gets lonely." The sentence sat heavily inside my chest after we hung up. The next morning, Naomi found me staring blankly at my computer screen. "You didn't sleep, did you?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. Without another word, she sat beside me. Then she said something I could not forget. "Sometimes betrayal comes from the people you would die for." I wanted to argue with her, but I could not. Ryan's nervous voice, Sophie's silence, the deleted messages, all of it kept circling through my mind like a storm refusing to pass. That night, I lay awake in my apartment, listening to distant sirens outside the window while staring at my phone. I kept hoping Sophie would call back and explain everything. She never did, before the sunrise arrived. 3 months into New York, my life felt like a constant loop of stress, silence, and sleepless nights. Graham kept increasing my workload, Sophie kept drifting further away, and every phone call between us felt colder than the last. One evening, my phone rang while I was reviewing blueprints alone in the office. "Sophie." I answered immediately. "Hey." Her expression looked strange on the screen. Nervous. Almost guilty. "We need to talk," she said quietly. My stomach tightened. "What happened?" She inhaled slowly. "I'm pregnant." For a second, the entire room became silent. I stared at her face, waiting for excitement to hit me. It never came. Instead, confusion crashed into me first. "You don't sound excited," Sophie said coldly. "I'm trying to understand. What's that supposed to mean?" I rubbed my forehead. "We were barely speaking properly before I left. So now you think I'm lying?" "I didn't say that. But you're thinking it." I wanted to deny it, but my mind had already started calculating dates automatically. The last few weeks before New York had been distant and tense between us. We barely touched each other. Now suddenly she was pregnant. Then movement appeared behind her. Ryan walked into view carrying a toolbox. "Oh," he said awkwardly. "Didn't know you were on call." Every muscle in my body tightened instantly. "What are you doing there?" I asked. Ryan lifted the toolbox slightly. "Relax." Sophie said the kitchen sink was leaking again. Sophie crossed her arms. "You already knew that." "Yeah," I replied slowly. "Guess I forgot." Ryan forced a laugh. "You sound stressed, mate." "I'm stressed." "Well, don't take it out on Sophie." The protective tone in his voice bothered me more than it should have. "I'm not taking anything out on her," I snapped. Sophie rolled her eyes. "See? This is exactly what I mean." "What do you mean?" "You've changed since moving there." I stared at both of them on the screen. Something felt deeply wrong, but I still could not prove it. Ryan cleared his throat. "I'll finish the sink." Then he disappeared from view. After he left, I asked quietly, "How often is Ryan there?" "Why does that matter?" "I'm asking a simple question." "He helps when things break because you're not here." The sentence stabbed harder than she probably intended. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake in my apartment, replaying the conversation repeatedly. Every detail felt suspicious now. The screenshots, the distance, Ryan constantly being around her. The next morning, Naomi found me staring blankly at my desk. "You look terrible," she said. "I think my wife's pregnant." "That's good news, isn't it?" "I don't know anymore." Naomi sat beside me carefully. "What happened?" I explained everything quietly while the office buzzed around us. When I finished, she frowned. "Your instincts are screaming at you for a reason. I don't want to believe my own brother would betray me. That doesn't mean he wouldn't." I leaned back heavily. "Maybe I'm losing my mind. Or maybe you're finally paying attention." Later that evening, my father called. "Congratulations, son," Malcolm Mercer said proudly. "Thanks. You sound miserable." "I'm just tired." "You should be celebrating. A child saves marriages." I laughed bitterly. "That's optimistic." Dad's voice hardened immediately. "Trust your wife like a real husband." "What if something's wrong?" "There's always something wrong when a man spends too much time alone." His words frustrated me. "You think I'm imagining everything?" "I think suspicion destroys families." After we hung up, Mom called separately. Her voice sounded softer. "How are you holding up?" "I honestly don't know." Long silence. Then I asked quietly, "Do you think Sophie's acting strange?" Another silence followed. "Mom, I think stress changes people," she finally answered. "That's not an answer. I don't want problems between you and your brother." My chest tightened instantly. Why would there be problems with Ryan? You boys already argue enough. The way she avoided my question terrified me more than any direct answer could have. Days passed, and Sophie became even more defensive whenever I asked about the pregnancy. "You keep interrogating me," she complained during another call. "I'm trying to feel included. You're trying to catch me lying. I just want honesty. You want control." Meanwhile, Naomi kept pushing me toward one impossible decision. "Go home," she said one afternoon. "I can't." "Why not? If I break this contract early, I'll owe the company a fortune. So your marriage collapses while you stay here, earning money?" I had no answer for that. That night, Sophie texted me a photo of dinner beside the caption, "Home alone tonight." I opened the picture absent-mindedly while eating takeaway noodles in my apartment. Then I noticed something at the bottom corner of the image. Location tag, shared accidentally. Ryan Mercer's flat. My breathing stopped completely. I zoomed into the screen again and again, hoping I misunderstood something. But I didn't. Everything inside me started breaking. I called her immediately, but she declined to call twice. A minute later, another message arrived. "Relax. You're overthinking again." I stared at those words until my vision blurred. If she had nothing to hide, why lie about being alone? Why was Ryan always there whenever I called? Deep down, the answer was already growing inside me like poison, and I hated myself for finally seeing it clearly. Unable to keep lying to myself anymore, I booked a flight back to Manchester 1 month before my contract ended. I told Graham there was a family emergency. "There's always an emergency with you lately," he muttered. "I'll return after the weekend." "You better." I packed my bags that same night without telling Sophie or Ryan. During the flight, my thoughts kept shifting between fear and hope. One moment I imagined catching them together. The next moment, I imagined Sophie crying happily when she opened the door and saw me standing there. Maybe the messages meant nothing. Maybe the location tag was accidental. Maybe I was destroying my marriage with paranoia. The taxi ride from the airport felt endless. Rain covered the windows while Manchester blurred outside beside orange streetlights. "You all right, mate?" the driver asked. "Long flight. You look pale." "I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. My chest felt tight the closer we got to the house. When the taxi stopped outside, I stared at the front door for nearly 30 seconds before stepping out. Sophie's car sat in the driveway. Ryan's motorbike sat beside it. My stomach dropped instantly. "No," I whispered. Rain soaked my jacket as I walked toward the house. I unlocked the front door quietly and stepped inside. Then I heard laughter upstairs. Ryan's laughter. For one horrible second, my body froze completely. I stood there listening carefully while my heartbeat pounded against my ribs. Then Sophie laughed too. My wife. I climbed the stairs slowly, gripping the railing so tightly my fingers hurt. Their voices became clearer with every step. Then I heard Sophie whisper softly, "What if Elliot finds out?" Ryan answered without hesitation, "He won't." Those two words shattered something inside me forever. I reached the bedroom door and pushed it open. My world collapsed instantly. Sophie stood beside the bed wearing one of my old shirts. Ryan stood shirtless beside her. Both of them looked terrified. Nobody spoke. The silence felt deadly. Finally, Sophie breathed my name. "Elliot." I punched Ryan before he could move. He crashed sideways into the wardrobe with a loud thud. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he shouted. "What's wrong with me?" I screamed. "You're sleeping with my wife." Ryan wiped blood from his mouth. "Calm down." "Don't tell me to calm down." Sophie stepped between us, shaking violently. "Please stop yelling." I stared at her in disbelief. "You're worried about yelling right now?" "It's not what you think," she whispered. I laughed so hard it almost sounded broken. "Really? Then explain why my brother is half naked in my bedroom." Ryan stood slowly. "Elliot, listen." I grabbed his shirt. "How long?" He avoided my eyes. "How long?" I shouted again. Sophie started crying. "Please, answer me." Ryan finally snapped back. "Months, all right?" The room spun around me. Months. While I worked myself to death in New York, my wife and brother were destroying me behind my back. "You pathetic bastard," I whispered. Ryan looked angry now instead of guilty. "You left her alone." "I left for work." "You were never here emotionally anyway." I hit him again. Sophie screamed, louder this time. "Stop it." Ryan shoved me backward. "I'm not fighting you." You already did that when you touched my wife. The rage inside me felt endless. Years of trust exploded all at once. Then I looked at Sophie. Tell me the baby isn't his. She covered her mouth immediately. That reaction told me everything before she even spoke. No, I whispered weakly. No. Tears rolled down her face. It's Ryan's. The words destroyed me. I stepped backward slowly, struggling to breathe properly. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I looked at Ryan again, hoping he would deny it somehow. He stayed silent with his head lowered. You're my brother, I said quietly. I never meant for this to happen. Then why did it happen? Neither of them answered. The room suddenly felt too small. I grabbed my car keys from the dresser and walked toward the door. Elliot, wait, Sophie cried. I turned around once more. Was any of it real? She started sobbing harder. That was answer enough. Outside, the rain hit my face like ice while I stumbled toward my car. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the keys twice. Once inside, I locked the doors and sat there breathing hard. Then the memories started attacking me. Our wedding day, our first flat together, late-night takeaway dinners, Sunday mornings beside her in bed. Every memory felt poison now. I slammed my fists against the steering wheel repeatedly until my arms hurt. How could you do this to me? I whispered. Hours passed while rain hammered the windshield. Sophie called 23 times. Ryan called 11. I ignored every single one. Mom texted once asking if I had landed safely from New York. I stared at her message without replying because I suddenly understood something terrible. My family was gone. It felt like strangers had stolen everyone I loved overnight. Near midnight, I opened my phone gallery. The first picture waiting, there was our wedding photo. Sophie smiling beside me in her white dress while I looked happier than I had ever felt in my life. My vision blurred instantly. Then I deleted the photo while crying uncontrollably alone inside the darkness of my car. I spent 2 nights sleeping inside my car before finally answering my father's calls. By then, my head hurt constantly, my clothes smelled like rain and exhaustion, and anger sat inside me like poison. Dad told me to come to my parents' house. We need to talk properly, he said. There's nothing left to talk about. There's always something left. When I arrived, Ryan's motorbike already sat outside. I almost drove away immediately. Instead, I walked inside feeling numb. Mom stood near the kitchen doorway, wringing her hands nervously. Dad sat at the dining table beside Ryan while Sophie stared silently at the floor. The entire scene made me feel sick. Dad spoke first. Sit down. I'll stand. Ryan looked exhausted, but I felt no sympathy anymore. Dad sighed heavily. This situation has become ugly. Ugly. I laughed bitterly. Ryan got my wife pregnant. Keep your voice down, Dad snapped. That sentence stunned me more than anything else. I stared at him in disbelief. You're worried about shouting? I'm worried about this family falling apart. It already fell apart. Dad rubbed his forehead slowly. You need to forgive and move on for the baby's sake. The room became completely silent. Even Sophie looked shocked by his words. You can't be serious, I whispered. What's done is done. I looked directly at Ryan. Say something. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. It just happened naturally. I exploded instantly. Naturally, I shouted. You stole my wife. You abandoned her in another country. Ryan fired back. I went there to support my family. You were gone all the time, even before New York. That doesn't justify betrayal. Ryan stood suddenly. I didn't plan this, but you enjoyed it. Neither of us moved for several seconds. Then Mom quietly interrupted. Please stop. I turned toward her sharply. Did you know? Her silence answered before her mouth did. Mom. Tears filled her eyes. I suspected something for months. My chest tightened painfully. And you said nothing? I didn't want conflict between my sons. You already had conflict. You just hid it from me. I was scared. Her confession cut almost as deeply as Sophie's betrayal. I looked around the room slowly and realized nobody there truly stood beside me except myself. Sophie finally spoke softly. Elliot, I never wanted this to happen. Then why did it happen? I was lonely. I laughed coldly. So you slept with my brother. You stopped loving me. That's not true. You became distant. I became busy trying to build us a future. Nobody defended me. Nobody. I walked out before my anger completely consumed me. Outside, I punched the brick wall beside the driveway until my knuckles split open. That evening, my older cousin Daniel Fletcher arrived at my hotel carrying takeaway food and beer. "You look terrible," he said honestly. "I feel worse." Daniel sat beside me quietly while I explained everything. When I finished, he shook his head slowly. "Ryan's an idiot." Dad practically defended him. "Your dad protects whoever creates less embarrassment." I stared down at the floor. I don't even recognize my own family anymore. Daniel handed me food. "Eat something." "I'm not hungry." "You need strength more than pride right now." Over the next week, Daniel became the only person I trusted. He helped me collect my belongings from the house while Sophie stayed upstairs avoiding me completely. As Daniel loaded boxes into his van, he said quietly, "Don't destroy yourself chasing revenge. I want them to hurt like I hurt. They will eventually." That's not enough. Daniel shut the van doors firmly. "Listen to me carefully. Rage feels powerful at first. Then it eats everything left inside you." I wanted to ignore him, but part of me knew he was right. Meanwhile, Sophie started controlling the story before I even had time to process my own pain. Relatives suddenly called, asking strange questions. "Aunt Claire told me you abandoned Sophie emotionally," one cousin said carefully. Another relative asked, "Is it true you became unstable in New York?" I realized Sophie was turning herself into the victim. The betrayal somehow became even uglier. Days blurred together after that. I drank too much, slept too little, ignored most phone calls, except Naomi's. She called nearly every evening from New York. "You sound exhausted," she said one night. "I'm fine." "No, you're surviving." "That's different." I leaned back against the hotel bed. My whole family chose them. Not everyone. Feels like everyone. Naomi stayed quiet for a moment before speaking again. "Don't let their betrayal become your identity." "I don't know who I am anymore." "You're still Elliot." Hurt doesn't erase that. Her words helped more than I admitted aloud. A few days later, Sophie asked me to meet her at a solicitor's office to discuss temporary separation papers. When I arrived, she looked pale and emotionally drained, but I no longer knew whether her sadness was genuine or convenient. The solicitor pushed documents toward me. "These are temporary arrangements while divorce discussions continue." My hands felt heavy picking up the pen. Sophie finally whispered, "I never wanted things to end like this." I signed the papers anyway. Then I noticed something that broke me one final time. Relief flashed briefly across her face. Months passed after the separation, and somehow the world kept moving even while mine had fallen apart. At first I hated that. I hated seeing people laugh normally, work normally, live normally while I still woke up every morning feeling betrayed. But eventually survival became routine. Daniel helped me rent a small office in Manchester after I officially quit my New York contract. "You're good enough to run your own business," he told me while we carried desks upstairs. "I'm not even sure I'm good enough to run my own life." "That feeling passes." "You sound confident." Daniel smirked. "Because I've watched you rebuild yourself before." The office was tiny, but it was mine. No Graham screaming behind me. No pretending everything was fine. Just a fresh start and a chance to breathe again. Therapy helped too, even though I resisted at first. "You avoid your anger by burying yourself in work," my therapist said during one session. "I avoid my anger because I'm scared of what happens if I stop." "And what do you think happens?" "I become my brother." She nodded thoughtfully. "Pain changes people, but it also reveals them." That sentence stayed with me afterward. Slowly, life became manageable again. Then Naomi returned to Manchester for a new development project. When she walked into my office for the first time, she smiled softly. "This place suits you. It still smells like fresh paint. Better than Graham Whitmore's office." I laughed for the first time in days. That's not difficult. Naomi became part of my routine without either of us forcing it. Coffee breaks turned into long conversations. Long conversations turned into dinners after work. One evening, she looked at me carefully across a small cafe table. "You smile more now." "Do I?" "A little." "That progress, I guess." "It is." For the first time since Sophie's betrayal, being around someone felt peaceful instead of exhausting. Meanwhile, Ryan and Sophie's perfect little relationship started cracking apart exactly the way Daniel predicted. Mom occasionally updated me quietly over the phone. Ryan lost his job, she admitted one afternoon. What happened? He kept arriving late, sometimes drunk. I closed my eyes briefly. Ryan had always been reckless, but now nobody protected him from consequences anymore. A month later, Sophie gave birth to a baby boy named Oliver. Dad tried convincing me to visit the hospital. He's still your nephew. No, I replied coldly. He's Ryan's son. Dad sighed heavily. Holding on to anger will poison you. What poisoned me was my family choosing betrayal over honesty. After that conversation, Dad stopped calling as often. According to Mom, Sophie and Ryan argued constantly after Oliver's birth. Ryan hated responsibility. Sophie hated instability. They had built their relationship on excitement and secrecy, but real life crushed both things quickly. One rainy evening, somebody hammered loudly on my office door after midnight. I opened it and immediately smelled alcohol. Ryan staggered inside, looking exhausted and unshaven. You look terrible, I said flatly. Nice to see you too. What do you want? He leaned against the wall. Money. I almost laughed. You're serious? I just need help for a few weeks. You've got nerve coming here. Ryan rubbed his face aggressively. Things are complicated. You mean reality finally arrived? His eyes darkened instantly. Don't start acting superior. You owe me nothing, I told him coldly. Ryan frowned. What? You heard me wrong. I said you owe me everything. He pointed toward me angrily. You think you're better than me now? No. I just stopped destroying myself for people who never loved me. The words hit him harder than shouting could have. For a moment, he looked genuinely ashamed. Then the anger returned. Sophie still talks about you sometimes. I don't care. She compares me to you constantly. That sounds like your problem. Ryan stared at me silently before muttering. You were always Dad's favorite anyway. I laughed bitterly. You ruined my marriage, and you still think you're the victim. He left without another word. A week later, Mom visited my office, secretly carrying a small cardboard box. What's this? I asked carefully. She placed it on my desk. Old family photos. I opened the box slowly. Childhood holidays. Birthday parties. Me and Ryan smiling beside each other before everything became ugly. Mom started crying quietly. I failed you, she whispered. I stayed silent. I should have told you what I suspected. Yes, you should have. I was trying to hold the family together. You held it together by sacrificing me. Her tears fell harder after that. I'm sorry, Elliot. For the first time in months, I believe someone in my family actually meant those words. I walked around the desk and hugged her gently while she cried against my shoulder. That moment healed something small but important inside me. Later that evening, Naomi dragged me to dinner after work. You've spent enough time hiding in that office, she said firmly. Halfway through the meal, she made a terrible joke about Graham's haircut, and I laughed so hard people nearby stared at us. Outside the restaurant, Naomi smiled warmly at me beneath the streetlights. There you are, she said quietly. What? The real you. As we stood there laughing together, I noticed a familiar car parked across the road. Sophie sat inside watching us silently before driving away into the darkness alone. The rain outside my office windows sounded soft that evening, almost calming. I was finishing revisions on a hotel project when somebody knocked quietly on the glass door. I looked up expecting Daniel. Instead, Sophie stood there. For a second, neither of us moved. She looked exhausted. Dark circles sat beneath her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly while holding her handbag. I walked over slowly and opened the door. What are you doing here? Can we talk? I don't know. Please, Elliot. Something in her voice sounded broken enough that I stepped aside silently. She entered the office carefully, staring around the room. This place looks good. I didn't build it for compliments. Her eyes lowered immediately. Fair enough. I stayed standing while she sat nervously across from my desk. Finally, I asked, what happened? Sophie laughed weakly. Everything. I crossed my arms without speaking. She inhaled shakily. Ryan's changed. I almost replied sarcastically before stopping myself. Ow! He drinks constantly now. He gets angry over small things. Her voice cracked slightly. Sometimes he smashes things during arguments. I stared at her quietly. He lost another job last month, she continued. We can barely pay bills. Oliver cries all night. Ryan disappears for hours without answering calls. You chose him. I know. Silence filled the office. Then Sophie whispered words I never expected to hear from her. I made the worst mistake of my life. For the first time since everything happened, I saw genuine regret in her eyes instead of defensiveness or excuses. But the pain inside me still remained. You didn't just cheat on me, Sophie, I said quietly. You destroyed my ability to trust my own family. Tears immediately rolled down her face. I know. No, you don't. I do. You and Ryan broke something inside me that still hasn't healed. She covered her mouth while crying softly. I hate myself for what I did. Part of me wanted satisfaction hearing that. Instead, I mostly felt tired. After several seconds, she whispered, Ryan pursued me first. I stared at her carefully. What? He started flirting after you left for New York. And you allowed it. I was lonely. That excuse means nothing anymore. I know it sounds pathetic. It sounds selfish. She nodded weakly. Maybe I wanted attention because I resented you. Resented me for working? You were always emotionally distant near the end. I was stressed, trying to build us a future. I know that now. I leaned against the desk heavily. So Ryan flirted with you, and neither of you care enough about me to stop. Sophie cried harder. At first it felt exciting. The honesty made me sick. Exciting, I repeated coldly. We kept telling ourselves it would end. But it didn't. No. I looked away toward the rain outside because seeing her cry no longer softened me the way it once would have. I loved you completely, I whispered. I know, and you still betrayed me. She wiped her face shakily. I don't expect forgiveness. Good. The word hit her visibly. After a long silence, she stood slowly. I just needed you to know the truth. The truth arrived too late. She nodded once before leaving quietly. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, Daniel called me while I worked. You seen social media today? He asked immediately. No. What? There's a video of Ryan and Sophie fighting outside a supermarket. My stomach tightened instantly. Daniel sent the clip seconds later. I watched Ryan shouting aggressively while Sophie held Oliver in her arms crying. People nearby stared while somebody recorded everything on a phone. Then Ryan suddenly yelled, You went crying back to Elliot. Sophie shouted back, Because you've ruined everything. The video spread quickly online because several people recognized Ryan from local business events connected to Dad's company. By evening, Mom called me in tears. Your father finally lost control, she whispered. What happened? He confronted Ryan after seeing the video. I closed my eyes briefly, and they screamed at each other for nearly an hour. Later that night, Dad called personally for the first time in weeks. His voice sounded older somehow. I failed both of you, he admitted quietly. I stayed silent. I kept defending Ryan because I thought protecting the family mattered more than confronting the truth. You protected him while he destroyed me. I know. Hearing guilt in Dad's voice felt strange after months of anger. He's out of control now, Dad continued. Drinking, fighting, blaming everyone else. He made his choices. Yes, Dad whispered painfully, and I helped create them. That same night, I drove past my parents' house after visiting Daniel. Ryan stood outside in the rain beside several bags thrown across the driveway. Dad stood at the doorway furious. Don't come back until you grow up, he shouted. Ryan looked devastated. You're choosing Elliot over me now? I'm choosing consequences. For once in his life, Ryan had nobody left protecting him. I watched silently from across the street as my brother picked up his bags and walked away completely alone into the darkness. A year changed almost everything about my life. The anger that once controlled me slowly faded into something quieter. The memories still hurt sometimes, but they no longer destroyed entire days. My business grew steadily. Daniel became my official partner, and for the first time in years, I felt emotionally stable instead of constantly surviving. One afternoon, Daniel walked into my office grinning. You remember when this place barely had enough money for coffee? He asked. I remember you stealing my lunch during those weeks. I was protecting company resources. I laughed. You're still unbearable, but successful. That part was true. We had 3 major projects running across Manchester now. Clients respected us. Employees trusted us. Life finally felt solid again. Naomi became part of that new life naturally. Nothing between us happened quickly because she never pushed me toward anything I was not ready for. That patience mattered more than she probably realized. One evening we sat beside the river, sharing takeaway chips while city lights reflected across the water. "You still think about her sometimes," Naomi said quietly. I looked down at my food. "Yeah, that's normal. I hate that part of me still remembers the good moments." Naomi nudged my shoulder gently. "Pain doesn't erase history. You always know the right thing to say." She smiled softly. "No, I just know what heartbreak feels like." I looked at her carefully. "You never told me your story. Maybe one day." Unlike Sophie, Naomi never demanded emotional shortcuts from me. She understood healing happened slowly. Then one rainy evening, Sophie texted me unexpectedly. "Can we meet one last time?" I stared at the message for several minutes before replying. "Fine." We met at a quiet cafe near the city center. Rain tapped softly against the windows while tired music played overhead. When Sophie walked inside, I barely recognized parts of her anymore. She looked older, exhausted by stress and sleepless nights. She sat across from me carefully. "Thank you for coming." "I almost didn't." She nodded weakly. "That's fair." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she finally whispered, "Ryan left months ago." I felt no surprise. "He rarely visits Oliver now," she continued. "Sometimes weeks pass without a call." I stayed quiet. Sophie looked down at her hands. I kept believing things would improve. But they didn't. "No." The sadness in her voice sounded real. "I traded a loyal man for temporary feelings," she whispered shakily. Hearing those words a year earlier would have satisfied me deeply. Now that mostly made me sad. Not because I still loved her. Because we destroyed each other's future together for nothing. Sophie wiped tears from her eyes slowly. "I know apologizing changes nothing." "It doesn't." I still needed to say it. I studied her silently across the table. Once this woman had been my entire world. Now, she felt like somebody connected to a painful memory instead of my future. Finally, I spoke honestly. "I hope you become a better mother than you were a wife." Her face crumpled instantly, but she nodded because she knew I was right. "You deserved better than me," she whispered. "Maybe, but I also ignored problems too long." "You loved me." I did. The past tense hung heavily between us. Then Sophie reached into her handbag and removed something small from inside. My wedding ring. She placed it gently on the table. "You left it behind after moving out," she said softly. I kept meaning to return it. I stared at the ring for a long moment without touching it. So many memories lived inside that tiny piece of gold. Promises, trust, a future that no longer existed. "You should take it," Sophie whispered. But I shook my head slowly. "No." I stood up carefully. "Elliot, I genuinely hope your life improves." Sophie. Tears rolled down her face again. "Thank you." I looked at the wedding ring one final time before quietly leaving it behind on the cafe table forever. Outside, rain covered the streets while cold wind rushed through Manchester. But for the first time in years, my chest felt light instead of heavy. When I reached the riverfront, Naomi stood waiting beneath a street lamp holding 2 coffees. "You all right?" she asked softly. I accepted 1 cup and nodded. "Yeah." She studied my face carefully. "You look different. I think something finally ended tonight." Naomi slipped her hand into mine gently, without speaking. Together we walked beside the river while darkness slowly faded into sunrise across the water. The city around us began waking quietly as soft gold light touched the buildings. I stopped walking for a moment and looked out across the river. The betrayal had scarred me deeply. Some wounds probably would never fully heal, but they no longer control my life. For the first time in years, I finally felt free.